Hi, it's Isabel, and because the holiday season is nearly upon us, I wanted to make a video recommending some beautiful books to you that I think would make great gifts. Now, at the beginning, I had this plan of doing like a really elaborate gift guide type thing, but then I just realised that I absolutely didn't have the time, and I think in general, I think most of us are quite stressed out by the holiday season already, especially this year, and I just didn't want to put any more pressure on myself or anyone else to find the perfect gift. So what I decided to do instead is just go around my shelves, and I pulled some books from my shelves that I just think would make really lovely gifts. This video doesn't really have a lot of structure. I mean, because I pulled the books from my shelves, they are sorted by genre because that's how my shelves are sorted at the moment. So if I don't forget, I will put like timestamps for the different genres if that's any help to you, but that's already about all of the structure that this video will have, because I thought it would be lovely to just sit down and have a chat about some really beautiful and lovely books. I've lit a candle, I don't know if you can see, but it's burning and it makes my room smell really nice. I also got myself a cup of tea, maybe you want to do that as well. And yes, basically I will just tell you about some books that I think would make great gifts. Where should we start? I think I'm going to start with fiction. So the first one I have from my fiction shelves is Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. And the reason why I think this would make a great gift is because it's a classic, it's a murder mystery. I think because it is more of a mystery than a thriller, it's kind of cozy, and I personally really like reading cozy mysteries in winter. You can like curl up with a cup of tea and just get immersed in a story and try and figure out the clues. And this one is probably my favourite Agatha Christie, and she is the queen of cozy mysteries for a reason. And Then There Were None is actually one of the few ones that don't have like a detective in them, so there's no Poirot or Miss Marple or anything. It is about 10 people who are invited to an island, but then one after the other starts dying, and it is clear that one of them has to be the murderer because they're isolated on that island. And the twist in the end took me completely by surprise the first time I read it. I think it's such a brilliant twist, and that's why I would really recommend reading it to everybody who hasn't read it yet. And I also think it would be a lovely gift to introduce somebody to this absolute classic of a murder mystery. And if they like it, you can always get them more Agatha Christie books in the future, so you would have kind of solved their gift-giving problem for a while. The next fiction book that I have is The Archive of Alternate Endings by Lindsay Dreger. And this one is a particular favourite of mine, and I just think it has a really, again, kind of cozy atmosphere reading it. It's a bit of a more unconventional one, I would say. So this book kind of takes the fairy tale of Hansel and Gretel and it puts it into like different times in history. It has a timeline every time Halley's Comet appears, and all of these timelines are also kind of tied to the Hansel and Gretel fairy tales. So you get a lot of kind of shorter vignettes from the different timelines and the different story threads that are all tied together by the comet and the fairy tale. And it has a special emphasis on the importance of stories in our lives, and I just really like that message as well, and I think it's a really beautiful and comforting book to read. And the same goes for my next fiction pick, which is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This one is a quite well-known book, especially here on BookTube, and it follows a group of travelling theatre performers after a pandemic. So it's a post-apocalyptic setting. Maybe there are people who don't want to read about a pandemic right now, but I think this one is actually a really comforting one because it shows that even after a catastrophe like this, life still goes on, and it really emphasises the importance of art, stories and theatre and music in bringing people back together and giving life meaning as well. So it's a really beautiful story. If you have somebody in your life who hasn't read Station 11 yet, I think this would be a really comforting and lovely read to give them. Then we get into my teeny tiny pile of short story collections that I would recommend. And the first one is Some by David Eagleman. And this one is really short stories, sometimes only like a page or so, imagining different afterlives. So one of them, for example, imagines your afterlife as being your life, but ordered by tasks you did. So you spend a certain amount of time taking a shower for all of the showers you took in your life, etc., etc. So it's really an interesting look at life by playing around with these kind of afterlives that you might have. So this one would be perfect for people who like to reflect on life and the way they live their lives, and also like their stories to kind of have a message to them. Even though they are of course kind of sci-fi-ish, dealing with the afterlife, but it's the kind of sci-fi that is really rooted in real life and does kind of make a point about real life. And then the second short story collection that I would recommend is A Registry of My Passage Upon the Earth by Daniel Mason. And this is one that I read this year and absolutely adored. I think it's just a gorgeous book to look at as well, just with the cover, and it's so nicely done. And it's also a short story collection that I just really enjoyed and I feel like might appeal to different people. So a lot of these stories have kind of a historical setting and take a close look at characters, some of them inspired by historical figures, some more like inspired by things that happened in history. So for example, you have a telegraph operator in the Amazon who's completely alone, and the only contact he has with other people is with the other telegraph operators on the same line. Or there is also one about a female balloonist, and a lot of these stories take on kind of a magical element, and that's what I really enjoyed about them. So this one would be perfect for people who like their historical reads to also have kind of a magical twist to them. Then we're moving into graphic novel territory. The first graphic novel that I want to recommend is Moon Cop by Tom Gold, and I absolutely love this tiny graphic novel. It's about a guy who is a cop on Moon because people have started living on the moon, but by the time this novel is set, they actually have started going back, so he's one of the last remaining people on the moon. And it's just a really sweet short story about this guy and his life on Moon, and the illustrations are all done in like dark blue, grey and white, and it's just a really calming and lovely graphic novel, and it always makes me smile when I read it. So I think this would be perfect for absolutely anybody that you would like to have a lovely time reading a graphic novel that will make them smile. Then I have an even shorter graphic novel, and it is The New Ghost by Robert Hunter, and this is really absolutely tiny, but it's absolutely gorgeous. And this one follows a ghost who is new to being a ghost, and he kind of gets lost and tries to rejoin the rest of the ghosts, and he makes some friends along the way. Why I absolutely love this one is because I just love Robert Hunter's style. So here's a page, for example, where the ghost gets some clothes and things to put on from a friend that he's made on Earth. And yes, this is just also like Moon Cop, I think really lovely to read, but it's also gorgeous to look at. So I would recommend it to give to people who really enjoy beautiful artwork and also a sweet, bittersweet kind of story. And then the last graphic novel goes in a completely different direction, and it is Sapiens, a graphic history. So this one is the illustrated version of the first part of Harari's book Sapiens, and this one follows the kind of evolution of humankind. And the way this is done is you like follow Yuval Noah Harari as he tells you about things. So there he is telling you who he is and what he's doing. And then you meet kind of different characters like his niece, who is asking questions, and they go, for example, to a professor who explains kind of evolution to them, etc, etc. So this is a really fun way to read about the evolution of humankind, and the illustrations are quite colourful and fun, and you have like comic style pages in here and just like different media. I think this is absolutely perfect to give to anyone who is interested in things like how modern humans came to be, and wants to learn it in a more fun way, I guess. I mean, I've already read Sapiens. I'm still enjoying reading this and being reminded of all of the things that the book said, but in a different way and in a more visual way. Then I also have some classics to recommend, and my recommendation would also be, like, if you have somebody in your life that reads a lot, like a lot, and you feel like they've already read everything, I would get them a beautiful edition of one of their favourite classics. So, the 3 classics I have to show you don't just stand as a recommendation for the books themselves, but also to maybe just get somebody a pretty edition of a classic that they've already read and enjoyed. And the classics I have are in kind of different times. So the first one is Shakespeare, and the book that I would recommend from him is As You Like It, because this is a comedy that I really love, but I feel like is a bit less well known than, for example, A Midsummer Night's Dream. But I think it's absolutely a lot of fun. It also has people going to the forest, people falling in love, women dressing up as men. There's a lot of confusion and fun going on. And it contains the absolutely famous All the World's a Stage speech. And this edition is the Pelican Shakespeare edition, and I have a few of these, and they are kind of cute and tiny and not as heavy to carry around as some of the more scholarly, I guess, Shakespeare editions, but they are really beautiful. They have like this front cover illustration, and then they have like a little quote on the back and another illustration, and I think having Shakespeare plays in these editions is also just really nice, and they even feel really nice. They have the matte finish that I really like, and as you can see, you can still annotate and do a lot with them. So if you know somebody's favourite Shakespeare play, or if you want to introduce them to a new Shakespeare play that you really like, I would recommend getting them one of these editions. Then the next book I have is also an absolute classic. It is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and this is the absolutely gorgeous Penguin English Library edition. All of these are illustrated by Coralie Bickford-Smith, and I think they're just gorgeous, and all of these have kind of these pattern designs, and they have a lot of classics in these editions, so they are really great if you want to collect classics in a certain edition. And of course I would also recommend, if you have somebody who hasn't read Frankenstein yet, to give them Frankenstein. The last of the classics that I have is We Have Always Lived in a Castle by Shirley Jackson. I just absolutely adore Shirley Jackson in general, especially We Have Always Lived in a Castle, and I also just love this edition that has deckled edges and French flaps, and there's like even little illustrations and quotes on the French flaps, and it's like illustrated all around. And this is the Penguin Classics Deluxe edition. They also have a bunch of classics in this edition, and these are more of the modern classics, I would say. If you want to introduce somebody to the brilliant genius that is Shirley Jackson and the absolutely unforgettable character Mary Cat Blackwood, who is the protagonist of We Have Always Lived in the Castle, I would absolutely recommend giving them this edition of this wonderful modern classic. If you don't know, this book is about 2 sisters living in a mansion alone because a few years back most of their family have died, and kind of everybody in the village thinks that it was the older sister who killed them, so they don't really want to have anything to do with them. But then somebody shows up who says he's their cousin and he wants to kind of take over the mansion, and the story goes from there. And it's really fun to read. I absolutely love the characters, and it's really gothic and creepy, and I really like it. I could talk about Shirley Jackson for ages, but I should probably move on. And the next pile of books that I have is poetry collections. I have just picked 2 from my shelf, and the first one is By Heart, and this is a collection of different poems from different poets edited by Ted Hughes. The focus of this collection is that it contains poems that you could learn by heart. And what I especially like about this collection is that it has an introduction by Ted Hughes explaining to you his method of how he learns poems by heart. And I think learning poems by heart is something that we don't really do that often anymore, but it's actually kind of lovely, and I have tried it and it really works, and I have learned some of the poems in here by heart, and I just enjoy the fact that I can now recite a few poems. So if you know somebody who's an absolute literature nerd like me, I think they would probably enjoy this collection. I have to say, it is not the most diverse collection, meaning that a lot of these are kind of the classics that you would expect, so mostly white men, but if you go with just the well-known classics, it contains a lot of them, and I think they are still very lovely poems. But to counterbalance that, if you have somebody who's more of a sarcastic feminist, also me, I would recommend giving them The World's Wife by Carol Ann Duffy. In this collection, Duffy takes some women of well-known men from history or mythology, and she kind of gives them their own voice and lets them talk about how they view the stories that they are part of. And this is a very tongue-in-cheek collection, and I think this would be a really good place to start with poetry because it's based on stories that you might already know, and they are really easy to read. And whenever I say they're easy to read, I don't mean that in a, oh, they're not as good as other poetry way, but I actually really like the fact that they're easy to read. And that's why I think this collection is one that you could also give to somebody who maybe doesn't read as much poetry yet, and they would probably still enjoy it. From poetry, we're moving on to non-fiction, and I want to start off with a book that I'm actually currently still in the middle of, but I already love and would absolutely recommend. And it is Monster, She Wrote. And this one, as the title suggests, is a book all about women who wrote horror fiction and speculative fiction, many of whom have been kind of forgotten or have been overshadowed by their male contemporaries. But this book really goes back and talks about all of these brilliant women and their works. And the way this book is structured is that it basically has a lot of parts telling you about the writer, and then also has a little reading list part of the books that they would recommend. And as I said, I'm currently making my way through it, and I already have a really long list of books that I want to read based on this. So again, this one would be great if you know somebody who reads a lot, but that you think might enjoy getting to know even more, especially female horror writers that they might enjoy. The next book is in a similar vein, and it is Literary Witches. Again, this one is about a lot of female writers, and it gives you a bit about the writer and also recommends you some books from them. And what I really like about this one is that it always has a gorgeous illustration of the writer in question. So this one is also just a really beautiful book to have and to look at, as well as a great resource to get to know even more female writers that might have been maybe a bit forgotten in some cases. But it also has some very famous names like Virginia Woolf or Mary Shelley, of course. My next recommendation is for all of the Greek mythology fans, and it is of course Mythos by Stephen Fry. There's also been a big hype about this book here on BookTube, but I think it is absolutely deserved. This is kind of a chunky book, and it is basically Stephen Fry retelling all of the Greek myths, and I think every Greek mythology fan would absolutely enjoy this book. And if they've already read this one, you could also maybe give them the follow-up, Heroes, or Troy, which has only just come out, so maybe they haven't read that one yet. My next recommendation is The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson, about beauty, obsession and the natural history heist of the century. And this one I would recommend for anybody who likes learning more about history, and especially the time of like Darwin and exploration, but also a bit of true crime, because this one follows the case of a guy who broke into the Natural History Museum and stole a lot of bird specimens, and many of them have been collected by Darwin's contemporary Alfred Russel Wallace. It kind of goes into why that guy stole all of these bird specimens, so it teaches you a lot about the Victorian art of fly tying. That might not sound like a very interesting thing, but it actually is really fascinating. And this is written in a really accessible way. It's kind of a fun adventure to follow this story and follow Kirk Wallace Johnson on his adventures to try and figure out what happened in this true crime story that also goes back to Victorian times, to modern times, and everything in between. And then the last book that I have is one that I would absolutely recommend you gift to all of your writing friends, and it is Wonder Book by Jeff Vandermeer. And this one is a guide to writing, especially weird fiction, but I think it's also applicable to any other genre of fiction that the person you're looking for a gift for might be writing in. And this one is a gorgeous book to have. It's illustrated throughout, so it has guides and illustrations on every page. And it's just a brilliant resource because it has explanations, interviews, exercises, everything you would want. And I'm personally also currently working my way through this, and I'm really enjoying learning about all of the different aspects of writing and doing all of the writing exercises. So I think if you have somebody in your life who is a writer, they would absolutely love having this book. And those were all of the beautiful books that I think would make great gifts that I had to talk about today. If you have anybody in your life with a specific taste that you're looking for a gift for, or if you're looking for a recommendation for yourself, please leave me a comment and I will do my best to try and come up with a recommendation for that person. I hope you have a lovely holiday season. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye!